So this is quite possibly the best sounding live session that I've ever heard besides the Radiohead basement session. Whenever I first heard of Men I Trust, I saw this video and it completely blew me away. I thought it was a music video. And if you look at the space that they're working within, it looks kind of junky. But under all of that junk, you'll start to realize that it's actually a really good sounding space. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna analyze and react to this live session. Then I'm going to use a very limited number of microphones in order to reproduce this session as accurately as possible. The goal here is to show you how to get just as good of a sound from your own home studio as you would see in this video. So here's the twist though. Sennheiser Neumann, which they're the same company now, they reached out because they wanted to sponsor a video like this. I always want to make sure that any sort of integration like this is helpful and beneficial to you. So we're only going to use this microphone, the Sennheiser MK4,
and a Neumann MCM114 snare mic.
Neumann also provided their new interface, the MT48, a very nice interface, and I'm very excited. But if you can't afford an interface like this, don't worry too much. You can use any 2-input interface to do a similar thing. That's enough preamble. Let's just get into it. I already have something to say. So one thing you'll start to learn, every single material on the planet has a different absorption index. We know this intuitively, but different materials are better at absorbing sound than others. So this entire room is made out of plywood, which is a great acoustic material actually. It's covered also in curtains, and it also has a carpet on the ground. And, sounds weird, it's full of human beings. Human beings are actually really absorptive materials. I will put on screen a little caption so you can see just how absorptive these different materials, including humans, are. Looks like we have just 2 SM57s. One SM57 on the kick drum, one on the snare. I don't see a microphone on those cymbals. I love him so much, dude. I hope this isn't mean. He reminds me of Franklin the Turtle. He's also playing incredibly quietly. So while this is already a pretty absorptive space, it's a live drum kit. He probably doesn't want to bleed too much into all of the other instruments, especially the vocals. So Emma is singing into a small diaphragm condenser. That looks like a Neumann KM184 if I had to guess. This is a really great microphone to choose for vocals. I think a lot of people think that a small diaphragm condenser or like these little pencil microphones are objectively worse than a large diaphragm condenser. It's not really the case. Actually, a lot of times a small diaphragm condenser can give you a far more accurate sound than a large diaphragm condenser. And that's because of the rigidity of the capsule. You got to think, if the capsule is a lot smaller, that diaphragm is going to move at a less flexible rate. And the result is a polar pattern, which basically just describes the directionality that a microphone picks up sound. That polar pattern is a bit more accurate, so you'll get more of a directional signal in the low end with a small diaphragm condenser than you would in a large diaphragm condenser. So it might sound a little less warm, but that's really just because it's a more accurate, less stylized signal. Men I Trust is a really good example of how you can get a really cool, really contemporary, really chill sound in a live setting. And that's partially because A, the drummer is really quiet, but Emma, the singer, is also very quiet. She's singing with a ton of breath in her voice. She's using a lot of her head voice, soft palate, and that is not going to reverberate in the room as much as, say, a belt would. And you're just gonna get a cleaner signal. Okay, the chorus has vocal doubles. I'm just noticing that. So not entirely a live session. Now, obviously we do have what looks like a guitar amp here, what looks like a bass amp that the bassist is sitting on, and then very clearly the keyboard is DI. But if you look here, this is a DI box, meaning that he's splitting the signal of his guitar, one going into an amp. We don't really know if it's being recorded, we can't see it, and the other one is definitely going DI. There looks like there is a preamp of some sort next to the bassist. So the bassist could not be going through his bass amp, could be going directly through whatever that is, whether it's a preamp, compressor, it looks like a preamp, and then DI. God, that is such a good tone. There's a few things here, guitar pedal wise, that we can probably assume are contributing to that kind of tone. The main thing here though is an auto wah. Sounds like there could potentially be a flanger or a phaser on it as well. Overdrive, that's what I think is probably comprising that guitar tone. Sick. mic. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's recap. The drums are super simple. Looks like there's only two 57s, one for the kick and one for the snare. Now there's a lot of prominent hi-hat in that sound. So if I were a guessing person, and this is how I'm gonna approach this mix, I'm going to use a kick and a snare mic and then duplicate that snare mic, one of which is EQ'd and mixed for snare, one of which has a really crazy EQ just to bring out the hi-hat signal running in parallel. Then for the bass, because that looks like an outboard preamp, I'm gonna assume he's running DI. In order to recreate that sound, we're going to use a digital preamp emulation. Super simple. Now for the guitars, I'm of the opinion that the Vox and this amp that the guitarist is playing through, they're not mic'd. I don't think they're actually making it into the actual recording. So I'm gonna assume that both guitar signals are running through an amp simulation using the effects that I had mentioned prior. The keyboard is easy enough. That is just a DI signal. And then for the vocal, we're going to sing very quietly, very breathy, and we're gonna use a condenser microphone. We're gonna use the MK4 because that's what we have available to us. But if you have a small diaphragm condenser, you might wanna reach for that. All in all, this sort of setup is very simple, but very effective. Even though they're all playing in a room that many might consider to be not ideal or, whatever. And that, I think, is plenty to get started on this one. Now, probably will spend most of my time learning the solo. See you back here soon.
All right, welcome back. This one did not take as long as the others. And really quick, these videos are insanely hard to make. If you look at the subscriber count, we're really not that big of a channel. The way these videos survive is when the algorithm rewards user engagement. So if you could subscribe, like, and comment, just all the things that help boost this video. If you enjoy this video, seriously, it helps me more than I ever realized. So thank you. So as you know, a big part of this one that was different from all the other forensic productions, all the track recreations that we've done in the past, this one we're working with a really limited palette. One Sennheiser MK4, our Neumann MT48 interface, and a Neumann MCM 114 snare mic. That's all we had. And the reason I'm bringing that up first is because when we went to go record the drums, we're working with a really limited number of mics. So we put the MK4 on the kick drum and we put the snare mic obviously on the snare. But there's one big difference in the way that we're miking this that I completely forgot to mention in the first half of this video. If you look back at the video, you'll actually see their SM57 is pointed towards the hi-hat. This is not typical. We're usually trying to reject as much hi-hat noise as possible. So typically we put that snare facing away from the hi-hat and towards the center of the drum. But this way we got way more hi-hat bleed. And if you don't have any overheads to mic that hi-hat, that's actually advantageous. But I still did that original idea. On a parallel track, I used a high pass EQ, boosted up the treble, and then added a bit of compression to emulate more of a hi-hat overhead sound. That's giving the snare a lot of its brightness, and it's also making the hi-hat much more prominent. You can actually listen with and without it right now. And just to give you guys a different flavor of how the drums could have gone, we also recorded the drums with a 3-mic setup, one Sennheiser E902 on the kick, the MK4 as a mono overhead, and still using the MCM as the snare mic. So here, you can check out what that 3-mic setup sounds like as compared to a 2-mic setup. And as always, shout out to Haj for being on all of our tracks, our drumming hero of the day, of the year, of the month. Wait, yeah, whatever. Here's his contact information if you need drums done. So for our purposes in recreating this track, I actually think the 2-mic setup is more accurate. We'll be using that one. Bass. If there's one thing I can drill into your head about a Men I Trust track, if you don't get the bass tone right, you don't have a Men I Trust track. So for the bass, if you guys are familiar with the band Juice, our boy Rami from Juice played the bass. Here's all of his info. Go follow him for sure. I had originally chose to play the bass on this track, and I did record a part. I recorded my bass part. It just sucked. And the reason why is, and it's a very specific reason why too. If you watch the bass on the track, he's playing a Fender short scale Mustang and he's using a pick and palm muting the entire time. I was palm muting, but I was using my thumb and I was using a normal, my jazz bass. Well, it just kind of sounded like a bass, and it's fine, I guess, but if I would have just stuck to using my typical, with a thumb, palm muting, typical bass tone, it wouldn't have made it. This track wouldn't have got there. Rami came in, not only played way tighter and more accurately than I did, but he's got the exact same bass that we needed. He's playing with flat wounds, which gives it a nice funky dark sound, and yeah, just played way more tastefully than me. Check out my bass playing versus Rami's bass playing. recorded him DI, and the DI tones on this preamp are insane. Using the onboard compressor on the MT48, we used about a 2-to-1 ratio, so we had a little bit of compression already going in. That gave the bass a really nice present attitude whenever we were tracking. We actually also used the onboard EQ and had a nice presence boost to give it a bit of a cut. We basically did nothing else to the bass. I added Ableton's amp simulator and made it very clean, very subtle. They're a little bit too powerful if you let it just, stay at 100% mix. But that's really about it. The bass, a crazy good player, flat wounds, palm muted with a pick, compression on the way in, and a good amp simulator, and that's all we needed. It was already 90% there without even doing any of that. Keys were again super easy. I had our resident keyboardist Jordan come in. If you saw him in the Hozier track, you know that he's a monster on the keys. All I did was lay out a MIDI keyboard, let him track using a basic Rhodes emulator, ended up using the Contact 7 keyboard emulators. And really the only thing to note is during the outro, we use volume automation to boost him up a lot higher to basically account for the fact that one of the guitars that was playing rhythm is now taking a solo. And you'll notice if you listen to the track that it sounds like a flanger or a phaser comes on a lot more aggressively on the keyboard during the outro. So we also automated a flanger and a phaser to come on. That's really it with the keyboards. All done through MIDI, all done through emulations. Didn't feel any need to use a proper keyboard during this one. Guitars. This is the only part I would say was definitively really hard. Not only just to learn his parts, because he bends into everything, but also I probably went through like 4 or 5 different trial runs to find a guitar tone that I liked. Starting with the lead tone that you hear in the intro, I did an amp recording, I did a completely clean DI, meaning just straight up guitar into interface. Then I did my guitar and pedal board into DI. And by the way, when I'm going DI, I'm always using the onboard compressor on the MT48, doing about a 2-to-1 ratio, just doing some minor compression. I think it makes my performance a little bit nicer, a little bit more present, and it's a very beautiful DI tone. It was awesome to use. And then I did the exact same testing for the solo, an amp tone, a clean DI, and a pedal board DI on both options. And I think very true to what they did in their performances, I ended up going with the guitar and pedal board through DI. So no amps were ever used on this recording. Every single stringed instrument was a DI sound. And based off of the conjecture that we saw in the first half of this video, I think that's about what they did as well. And there's a couple key things to think of when you're going after this guitar tone. First off, I don't want you thinking that you have to look at the Min I Trust pedal board and you need that pedal board. You need an overdrive. You need one overdrive. Set that overdrive to have plenty of bass and mid presence and just cut that treble. Cut it to like 10-15%. That's what I did. I have a Wampler Tumnus. That's what I used for my overdrive. Pretty much all the rest of the tone you can get using just digital emulations. Except for one thing. I was going to be kind of bold and was not going to use a wah pedal. Was going to try and essentially make a wah pedal in the DAW and route it to a MIDI knob and do it in post. It didn't work. It just didn't work. So I ended up buying a Dunlop Crybaby Mini Wah, super important to the guitar tone. And that's because of the solo on the outro. Watching back his performance, it doesn't actually look like he's playing with a wah. He might have an auto wah on or something, but that's really not the point. The point I'm trying to make is that you need this kind of cocked wah sound. This essentially means keeping the wah pedal about 75% onto like the bassier, darker side, and just kind of existing in that land and venturing out of it ever so slightly during all the phrases of the solo. If he's going to a high note, I might go pretty close to the treble side, but I'm mostly staying in that cocked wah territory. That made my guitar tone. If I didn't do that, if I didn't get a wah pedal, I don't think I was going to be able to do it. And then in order to get the guitar more accurate, it was a lot of low pass filtering in post, definitely using chorus emulations. If you've got a chorus emulation, any chorus emulation, put it on all the guitars. Tube emulations. The saturator plugin in Ableton, paramount to this kind of tone. Okay, so let's hear the intro phrase, both mixed and unmixed, and a couple phrases from the solo, mixed and unmixed. You can see I'm cutting a lot of information, and that's a key point I want to make here. Start with something that's too much and chop it down in the mix. If you start with something that was too conservative, you can't make up that treble information in post. It's gone. It was never there in the first place. So just because it doesn't sound completely accurate yet does not mean you can't make it accurate whenever you're working in the mix.
He saw them, they saw him.
Vocals were super simple. Sennheiser sent one of the MK4s over to Rachel Hardy, and she sung it perfectly. That's what happened. And if somehow you haven't heard of Rachel Hardy, please go check her channel out. It's a really cool mix of amazing vocal covers and like medieval stuff. I don't know, just go watch it. You're gonna really like it, I promise. It's a really breathy, mixed, quiet sound, sung close to the microphone to get the bigger proximity effect sort of thing. I didn't EQ her voice. It was already really accurate as is. I put one LA2A emulation on her to make it a little bit louder. I used one harmonic saturation plugin and then one vocal compression chain in parallel. One is an 1176 emulation, one is a distressor emulation, and the third is fresh air. Mix it into the other signal, you add a bit of breath and treble to the vocal. But because you're not EQing the main vocal like that, you're not cannibalizing all the warmth that you would normally get by not EQing like that. Here's the vocal mixed and unmixed and with the parallel send and without the parallel send.
He saw them, they saw him, but everyone just kept on going. He saw them, they saw him, but everyone just kept on going. He saw them, they saw him, but everyone just kept on going. He saw them, they saw him, but everyone just kept on going.
And then the final step is one of my new favorite trends that I use called the rear bus from Andrew Sheps. Took it from my Hozier video. I send every single harmonic instrument, meaning every instrument that's not a drum or rhythm, to a separate 1176 emulation, effectively creating a parallel compression track for all the harmonic instruments that is in parallel to the actual mix. And then those get blended into the master, and that's the mix. And with all that, we are ready to watch the mix. See you on the other side.
He saw them, they saw him, but everyone just kept on going. What he saw was different. He should have gone to bed, but instead he stuck around for the moon. In the shadows he saw four eyes lit by fire. He'd never done that with a lover before. Either early or late, it was number 7, and it happened. I like a bird with his beak through the window. He saw them, they saw him, but everyone just kept on going. What he saw was different. He should have gone to bed, but instead he stuck around for the moon. He saw them, they saw him, but everyone just kept on going. What he saw was different. He should have gone to bed, but instead he stuck around for the moon.
All right, I hope that was helpful. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks to Neumann and Sennheiser for sponsoring this one, and I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.